Right, so in this one we want to rationalize the denominator. And this is not something I usually do, but this shows a really nice technique that we're going to build on and use when we deal with rational functions in the future. So we have this square root of 5 plus this square root of 6 on the bottom. Now we tend not to like square roots on the bottom for historic and typesetting reasons. But if I multiply top and bottom by the square root of 5 minus the square root of 6, also called the conjugate, if you're into that kind of terminology. Multiply that on the top and the bottom. Right? We want to multiply it. Right? This thing is 1. Right? It's the same thing on the top as the bottom. It's even easier to see if I put parentheses around everything so that we see that these are binomials. Okay? All right. Now, multiplying the top by 3 just means that we get 3's multiplied by both of these things. So we're going to get 3 times the square root of 5 minus 3 times the square root of 6. Now on the bottom, for the moment, I'm going to write it as square root of 5 plus square root of 6 times square root of 5 minus square root of 6. Okay. And now you can either FOIL it out, if you remember FOILing, or you can just distribute. Okay. In this case, I'm going to distribute. So my top, which I'm not doing anything with anymore, we get the square root of 5 plus 6 times the square root of 5. Okay, which means that the square root of 5 multiplies into both things, so we're going to get the square root of 5 times the square root of 5, which is the square root of 5 squared, plus square root of 5 times the square root of 6, or you can, since multiplication and square roots play nice, so you can think of this as the square root of 5 times 6. And then we're going to get negative the square root of 6 times both of these things, right? So we're going to get negative square root of 6 times the square root of 5. So we're going to get negative the square root of 6 times 5 minus the square root of 6 squared. Okay. Now, can this be simplified? Well, the top, I haven't done anything with. 3 times the square root of 5 minus 3 times the square root of 6. The square root of 5 squared, right, they undo each other, right? So this gives us 5 plus the square root of 5 times 6 is the square root of 30 minus the square root of 6 times 5, which is also 30, minus the square root of 6 squared, and again the square and the square root undo each other. Okay, now again I ask the question, try to ask this at each step, can this be simplified? Well, I'm adding 30 and subtracting 30, and any time I'm adding and subtracting the same thing like that, they cancel out. What I'm left with is 5 minus 6. Well, 5 minus 6 is the same thing as negative 1. So on the bottom, I simply have a negative 1. On the top, I have my 3 times the square root of 5 minus my 3 times the square root of 6. Okay. Now, this negative, I can turn that into something where I multiply both of the things on top by negative. And having a 1 on the bottom at that point doesn't really get us anything. So I can write this as negative 3 times the square root of 5 minus a negative times a negative is a positive for the second term, so it's going to be plus 3 times the square root of 6. So that initial fraction is the same thing as this number down here. And now we're done.